Welcome to the June 2025 Real Estate Market Update brought to you by the Reby Homes team. Well, it's safe to say that the last 4 weeks saw nothing exciting in the real estate market. No movement in rates, high supply, although it's staying pretty flat month over month. Buyer demand is still struggling to improve, and sales volume remained low, although it did show a slight improvement from April. National inventory reached a million for the first time since 2019, which is actually a positive for the long term health and stability of the real estate market. With more houses on the market and little help in the mortgage rate department, pressure is being put on prices, which is a relief for buyers. That doesn't mean we should sound alarm bells, however. Inventory may be up, but looking at our housing deficit since 2012, it's much needed. Since 2018, the national housing supply has been in a deficit. Over the last 7 years, builders have worked hard to catch up, and sellers finally putting their home on the market after the craziness of 2020 to 2022 are also contributing to the shrinking of that deficit. So, yes, inventory has grown significantly, but no, that doesn't mean we have a concerning oversupply. We do, however, have an affordability issue. There are more sellers than buyers at the moment, but it's not because there's too much supply, it's because not enough buyers can afford to buy. That's where the increase in supply, putting a healthy downward pressure on prices, is a good thing. Not to mention, buyers have more options to choose from, negotiation power when it comes to concessions and repairs, and flexibility with terms such as longer escrow periods to help accommodate buyer needs. For example, lining up the end of your lease to your close date or your cross country move with your close date is much easier to do when there's little competition. Both temporary and permanent rate buydowns funded by the seller are becoming increasingly common, and the impact those buydowns can have on buyer affordability is significant. Price reductions are happening more frequently across the country. This graph shows the percentage of sellers who made a price reduction in the month of May. So they are happening, but it's also important to note that a reduction does not equal a plummet in value. It's an adjustment in seller expectations that have been skewed since the frenzy. Sellers are basing their list price solely off of comps that have sold in the past, rather than current market value, which is changing day to day. The issue with using comps alone is that they oftentimes don't factor in concessions, repairs, or improvements made to the homes that recently sold. For example, if your neighbor sold last month for $500,000, but they gave the buyer $20,000 for a buydown, repaired the roof and AC, and refinished the pool decking, they didn't sell their home for $500,000. They sold it for closer to $470,000. But that doesn't show up in the comps. That's why prices are staying elevated across the board, because they're giving value elsewhere, and that doesn't always get recorded. So sellers, just something to keep in mind when you're pricing your home. Both expired and canceled listings are on the rise, with a 17% increase from January 2025 to May. And this is expected as our supply was far outpacing our demand. Many sellers decided to take a shorter listing agreement to see if they got any bites, and when they didn't, they let their listing expire or pulled it off the market. This is also not an indication to sound alarm bells, however, because the vast majority of homeowners who have low rates and enough equity don't need to sell. In other words, many of the listings on the market are not desperate sellers. The good news is many of the sellers who pulled their listing did end up relisting and at a lower price. While 37% relisted at the same price, over 43% relisted lower. Of all of the homes that came back on the market, over 70% ended up selling at a lower price. So it's not that homes aren't selling, it's just that they need to be priced appropriately, and it's that simple. And now let's take a look at what's happening in our local Phoenix market. Active listings are up with a little over 26,000 available homes on the MLS, and that's pretty in line with 2014 numbers. But if we look at Cromford data, which weeds out some of the random listings that pop up from Flagstaff or other MLSs, not in Maricopa County, Yavapai, or Pinal County, that number drops to about 23,000. A lot of people are raising concern over the uptick in listings. However, let's take a look at that. This shows weekly active listings going back to 2022, and while it's quite a bit higher than previous years, it's not skyrocketing. The increase has tapered off over the last couple of months and has remained fairly stable with a slight decrease. So it's not rising at a concerning pace. Keep in mind that during the 2008 crash, there were about 54,000 active listings. So we would need to see this number almost double to start getting concerned. A big reason we aren't seeing those numbers rapidly increase is because there aren't enough distressed sellers like there were in 2008. Over half of the homeowners here in AZ have more than 50% equity in their home. They also likely have a rate of 4% or lower. Because of that, those who do have to sell probably have enough equity to give the buyer what they want and still walk away with a gain. Or their payment is manageable enough that they choose to pull their home off the market and sell at a later time. And we know this is happening because canceled and expired listings are up, and many of them do not relist. So although there are more sellers than buyers right now, those who bought in 2021 or sooner are most likely in a strong enough position to come out on top despite current market conditions, while those who bought in mid-2022 or later may want to consider holding on to their home if they can for a couple more years. Appreciation has stayed pretty flat depending on the area. Some cities saw a 0% change year over year, while others saw a tiny increase, but no major appreciation. Here's a look at average price per square foot from 2017 to May 2025. A lot of bouncing around since the peak of June 2022. May ended at 304 a square foot, which is down 1.3% from April, but up 1% from May of 2024. If we take out luxury or anything over a million, those numbers drop to an average of 253 a square foot, which is down 0.81% from April and down 1.2% from May of 2024. Seller paid closing costs or concessions are still elevated as expected, with over 50% of all closings offering concessions, with the average amount being $10,000. If we break it down by price point, that percentage jumps to almost 60% for homes between $225,000 and $600,000. So buyers, if that's your price range, don't hesitate to ask for the concessions, and sellers, be prepared to give. Overall, this is an opportunity-filled market for buyers looking to negotiate, get repairs, and possibly even some improvements. For sellers, it might not be the most favorable market, but if you've owned for over 5 years, you're still in a good spot. If you do need to sell, just be prepared to be accommodating and price strategically. And that'll wrap up our June 2025 market update. As always, if you have any questions or want to see data in your area, don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.